sounds good. Thank you.
We have a found item that was found, so if a Sandra Jenkins is here, her missing item is up on the front table. Thanks.
Test. Should I pull it down?
I think you're good.
Okay.
I think I was just loud.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the third annual Changing Minds event. It's great to see so many people out tonight to learn more about mental health and awareness in our community. My name is Sherry Leeser, and I'll be your facilitator for this session this evening. If you haven't already done so, please silence your cell phones. And then I also wanted to mention, if you have a program with you, if you could just turn it over and look at the back side. For sake of time, I don't want to go through all of our committee volunteers and our sponsors, but I definitely would like to thank them for the countless time they put into this and for the sponsors so that we're able to host this free community event. So if we could please have a round of applause for our committee and our sponsors. This session is expected to last about an hour and 15 minutes. So first I'll go through and do some opening remarks, and then after that I'll invite Joan Becker up to the stage to share her family story. And then after Joan finishes speaking, we'll open it up for questions and answers. And then Joan also has a booth available that is out in the lobby where she is selling books, and she is also doing book signing if you're interested in that. So many of you may be wondering what my role is in the mental health field. We had two presenters earlier connected with mental health as well as introducers. And my role comes similar to Joan's role in that I'm a mental health advocate just from my own personal experience. So I have a daughter who's a young adult now, and for sake of her privacy, I won't go into details, but my story with her began when she was 9 years old, and it started out with an ADHD diagnosis. And at that time, I can remember how I felt over an ADHD diagnosis and struggling to decide, is medication the right thing to do? What do you tell friends and family? Is my child going to be labeled in school? And that was many years ago, and as time progressed, we got through the middle school and the high school time period, and things didn't get any better. In fact, they actually got worse, and it would ebb and flow over time. And it ended, there was a point in her freshman year in high school where she was expelled from high school freshman year, and she wasn't able to experience a normal high school experience, and that broke my heart. That was very hard for me. Sorry, that's a little emotional, but I'm very proud of her now and who she's become, and I think it's important. She always said, I just want to be normal, and so I think that's really hard for those that struggle with mental illness to feel normal, and for their families to have other people that understand them and to have people to connect with. So my life experience is what brought about Changing Minds 3 years ago, and I'm very thankful that I had lots of people believe in the idea and the notion and that supported to make this event possible. So sorry about choking up, but it's an emotional topic for me, and with that, I would like to thank everybody for coming out to learn more about mental health. I think that my daughter just wanted to feel normal, and I was scared and alone, and I just wanted to have somebody to talk to and understand. It's hard enough to navigate the system and navigate insurance and navigate trying to find a treatment bed and waiting for help and trying to find out what's the right help. Is it mental health? Is it substance abuse? Is it co-occurring? So it's very difficult for families to get through, and I think that's important for everybody to realize. And it's difficult for the individual who's having that mental health situation. They didn't ask for it, and they don't want to be different. So I just want to get that message out there. I thank you for allowing me to share my story, and what we're really here for tonight is to hear Joan's story. So a little bit about Joan's background. Joan lives in Parkersburg, Iowa, near Parkersburg, Iowa, with her husband of 36 years, David Becker. They have 3 sons, Brad, Scott, and Mark. Joan, in her statement, she believes that God actually wants them to share their family story. And I apologize, we were a little late starting. Joan and I were sharing some of our experiences and talking about how we feel everything happens for a reason, and we're thankful for our faith. But with that, Mark, who is Joan's son, her family has gone through different trials and tribulations as a family surrounding his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. So I would like to go ahead, if you could give a warm welcome to Joan to come up and share her family story. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Never apologize about crying. Never. Okay. There, that'll save your ears a little bit here, folks. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in and begin. Merriam-Webster Online describes tragedy as an event causing great suffering, destruction, and distress, such as a serious accident, crime, or natural catastrophe. Our family experienced such a tragedy on June 24th, 2009, when our son walked into the high school weight room and shot and killed his former high school football coach. This is what the world knew that day. What they didn't know is what led up to that day. And that is what I'm here to share with you tonight. It all starts with looking at the whole picture. And tonight we're going to define the person in the middle as a patient. But I'm going to define what makes up that patient. It starts with family. As Sherry stated, Dave and I have been married. We are high school sweethearts, and we've been married 36 years. We have 3 wonderful sons. Our oldest son, Brad, is a manufacturing engineer in Urbandale, and he and his wife, Jackie, live there, and they blessed us with our first grandchild last September. And little Miss Vela is just the sweetest little gal that you could ever meet. Of course, I'm a grandma talking, but it's just such a lift to all of us to see this next generation of life filling our hearts with love and laughter and joy. And so we really have enjoyed this next stage in our family's life. Our youngest son, Scott, married his high school sweetheart a year ago. He is an industrial technology teacher at Ankeny Centennial High School, and his wife has 1 year left in the architecture program at Iowa State University. They're a very busy young couple, and it's just really nice to have them in Ames, just an hour and a half away. I'm so blessed that my family is within 2 hours of where I live, and we can go and see them and be a part of their lives and them a part of our lives. Before I start visiting more about Mark Becker, our middle son, I want to talk about the importance that the spiritual piece. Oh, I got to go back. Uh-oh. I'm going to jump right into it, I guess. I apologize for that. So let's jump into Mark. When Mark was a young boy, he was very energetic, lots of laughter, fun, energy, a little ornery. He was born right on his due date. He started walking at 8.5 years old, and I had to run from that point on to keep up with that kid. He was just a joy. He was Dad's right hand. He loved getting involved with the woodworking and helping on the farm and doing all the things that come with being a family on the farm. And he just wanted to get his fingers into everything. When he got into middle school, boy, I'm having a time tonight. When he got into middle school, he was very involved with sports. He was on the student council. He played in band and vocal. He didn't want to be part of the drama out front, but he liked doing stage stuff behind the scenes. So he stayed very active and involved. And he was a leader amongst his peers. Next, I want to talk about bringing the spiritual piece to our family's life and the importance that it is to us and it was to Dave and I to raise our family together in a church setting. Our family went to the church, actually the same church that Ed Thomas and his family go to, but we felt it was important when we were raising our boys that when we took them and dropped them off to Sunday school, Dave and I also started a Sunday school class at that time. It was a new class called the Young Married Couple, the Young Couples group, the Young Married group. And we went to the adults Sunday school class, and there were two couples, us and one other couple, and Ed Thomas was our teacher. This class grew over the years to 30 years later. They had to change the word and take young off of the title. And there was a regular Sunday was over 100 attendees. You never know or realize how important some of the life lessons you are learning and absorbing during that fellowship time with other adults, and how much that's going to mean to you later in life. It helped us to understand and know exactly where Ed stood with his faith walk and how he stood on so many issues of living life and dealing with life. Those times have given Dave and I so much comfort and peace over the years, just knowing how he would have responded if he hadn't been the victim in this situation. Our boys were very busy and involved with youth group. They went on mission trips with their dad and on church camp. They stayed very active. So as we get into the next piece of what makes up this patient, we really need to take into account their social network. When Mark got into high school, things were going along very, very well, staying active in this church, in his youth group, sports. He's got a job at the grocery store. And of course, if you're going to be involved with all the school activities, you were the one that got up at 4 o'clock to unload truck in town at the grocery store, which was fine. He was happy to have a job. So him and Brad would go together, and they had their jobs so that they could have some gas money in their car. And it started out quite well. It was when Mark turned 16 years old that we started to see some pretty serious changes taking place in his life. This is when he started to be a little bit more quiet in nature, not this, bubbly, happy-go-lucky kid. It was like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. It came to us that he got caught using marijuana. And he came to us and had to tell us about that. And of course, he had to go tell his coaches about that. And he suffered the repercussions of what takes place, not just in the policy handbook of what you have to do because you broke the rules, but living in a small town and the judgment that might never go away because you made a poor choice and a poor mistake. That's a very difficult thing to overcome in a small community. But it doesn't matter. He made that decision. He had to pay the consequences of it. He went to an outpatient program. What concerned me is I was hoping this is something that parents could be involved with, because we were very concerned and we just couldn't get an answer from him. Why would you even think about using a substance like this that absolutely, that we've talked about the dangers of and the repercussions of? Why would you do such a thing? But this was just an outpatient program where him and a bunch of other kids that were just going through the motions so they could get back playing their sports again were going through. And I know he went to every one of them because I personally drove him over to every single one. And I became very discouraged as I sat in the parking lot waiting for my son to come out. And in the car right next to me, kids are rolling joints just out in the open. And I thought, I wonder if this is really going to help our son, Mark. I don't too often say to do it over again, I would have done this. But I will say to do it over again in this situation, right then, at that point in Mark's life, I would have gotten us involved with a family counseling situation, and we would have dug and found out it was the voices he was trying to escape. But that would not come out until years later, in fact, just recent years, that we found out what led to that. At any rate, his school was going fairly well. I'm not saying that the remaining of his high school years were without incident, but without boring you with all the details, I will say by the time he was a senior in high school, he was meeting with an individual counselor. He was 18 by then, so I was not involved. However, I was able to find out from his counselor, because Mark permitted her to speak to me, that he was setting some goals, he was attaining those goals, and he had such a sense of hope and positive attitude as he was stepping out of high school and into the chapter of going to college. He was excited, he was doing well, he was on fire and ready to go. What took place over the next several years, let's take a look now on the education employment piece. Because as this patient comes in the door, all these pieces, all these parts of that individual come into play, but unless we can somehow bring that all together with a holistic treatment system, you're only going to get just tiny bits and pieces, each agency, each piece of this, each part of this. Let's talk about the years that took place from August 2004 to June 2008 in our son's life. It was really interesting to me when we were preparing for the trial, and also then when I went back to start realizing that I wanted to put this into a book form, is I had kept journals, notes, through the years as a coping mechanism for myself, and also just, I'm always a note taker, that I write down dates and times and this is what took place, because that's just who I am. But I did not realize the pattern that was taking place in my son's life over this time period until I went back and started piecing it all together. It became very clear the roller coaster ride that all of us started on during this time period. But when you're living it and you're trying to cope each day in and day out with decisions and supporting someone who is going through something horrific that we didn't even understand most of the time, you don't realize and put it together that there's a pattern developing. What took place during this time is Mark enrolled and stopped college 3 separate times. Each time he would start and he would be doing very, very well. And it would be like mid-semester and all of a sudden we'd see him start to dive. He would just draw into himself, and part of that was it became too much for him to keep up with the illness that we did not know was going on, and he didn't know was going on. He didn't know what was causing him to feel the way he was. But the other thing that come into play is he also started experimenting with some other street drugs, and some of them very heavy drugs. It happened a couple times that we're aware of, because those 2 particular times, it never lasted long, because he would not take care of himself, he would not eat, and he would end up moving back home. Thus the reason he worked at 11 different jobs during this time frame, and he moved 12 different times. Every other move was back to our house because he wanted support and he wanted the accountability that he had with us and living under our roof. So he was in this cycle, and we were trying to get him over this time period. We would take him to doctors, we tried psychologists, nothing seemed to work. He never would stay with anything long enough for us to get any real answers, because he was determined to succeed, and he would go and get a job and he would succeed and he would do very well. Okay, we're doing good, let's keep going. And it's just like this pattern. He would then start to roll back, and as parents you almost don't even realize it's happening till it's really a dive situation again. Next piece we have to talk about, because these are the years that we really started to see the physical and mental deterioration in our son. What ended up happening is in May of 2008, Mark had, that's when the tornado hit Parkersburg. And at that time, Mark was living out in Vermillion, South Dakota with his brother Brad. He was doing very well. He was an assistant manager at a grocery store. And we would go visit those two boys often, and we just loved it because, and even in my journal, you would see me praising God that our son was finally back and that he was on his 2 feet, working full-time, benefits, insurance. We were just like, hallelujah, here we are. He's gotten over it. He's gotten through this. However, when we would visit, and Mark was talking a lot with us and communicating a lot with us of how he felt when he would move back home and he would be so lost and so trying to find his way back because he messed up again. And I just don't know why I messed up again type of deal. But he said some of the thoughts that he was having. And he goes, you know how at night, you'd stay up with me because I'd be afraid to go to sleep? He said, remember when I'd stand at the window? He goes, there were like black, slinky shapes lurking in the trees. But God's angels would come and they'd slink away. And he was communicating about a lot of these dark thoughts and experiences that he had been going through. And when I asked him, maybe you should be getting to a doctor out here and telling a doctor about these experiences. Because Mark, although you seem to be doing really well, I still sense such a quietness about you. Sort of like you're not all there. It's like you're in another, where's your mind? Because we can be talking and you just seem like your mind is a million miles away. He didn't want to go to a doctor, and he was, to the outward eye, he was doing well and succeeding at work, so we didn't make a big deal of it because he was successful. But after that tornado hit, he started to call home, and he said, Mom, I know that you and Dad are busy helping with the tornado cleanup, and I just want you to know you don't have to keep getting in my mind and controlling my actions. I know you and Dad are both doing that. I just want to tell you, you don't have to do that because I'm doing just fine on my own. And when he first said that, I was so busy thinking about the million things I was trying to get done that I had to just sort of stop. And I think I might have even called him back and said, Mark, what did you just tell me? Because it was so bizarre. And he just said, Mom, I know you and Dad are trying to control my actions. I'm okay. You just do what you need to do. Well, his brother Brad started calling home as well with concerns about Mark. And he stated to us he wasn't sure who he would see when he walked in the door at night. Sometimes it's my brother Mark, and we have a good time. We'll play guitar, might have a beer together. And he goes, other nights I walk in the door, I don't know who's standing before me. Mark looks different. He sounds different. He's aggressive behavior. His voice is lower. And he is so vulgar language, vulgar body language. He goes, I don't know who this guy is, and I can't talk to him. He won't listen to me. And he was locking his door at night because he was afraid of Mark. Well, obviously, Dave and I prayed about it, and we talked about it, and we knew this wasn't Brad's responsibility. We didn't know, is Mark using drugs again? But we had never seen this type of behavior when our son used drugs before. So we were very concerned and confused what was going on in Mark's life. But by July, we did move Mark back home with some rules about no drinking, or no, he was of age to drink. If he wanted to have a beer at home, he could. No driving if you've been drinking. No straight drugs. And we had a drug kit at home that we did use, and it was clean, but those were the rules. He went and got a full-time job immediately, and he went to work every day and came back every day. And he and Dave, I was traveling quite a bit with my work then, but him and his dad really had some really good quality time together. And Mark just seemed very content being home and being with his family. And he wanted to move back also to support his younger brother, Scott, who was going into high school and would be involved with sports. And he wanted to follow Scott and support him. So it was neat for Scott to have a brother around again, too. So that was going fairly well. But what we did notice, however, is that although he was working and seemed to be doing pretty good, what ended up happening is he had these such quiet, again, the part where the mind seemed a million miles away. I remember hearing him talk out in the other room, even laughing, like he was having a conversation with someone. I went out expecting him to be on his cell phone. He was just talking to thin air, laughing at something in thin air. And when I would talk to him about it, he wouldn't respond right away. I'd ask him a question, you know, what's going on? You know, what are you thinking about that you're talking like this? And it might be 5 or 10 minutes later when he'll say, Mom, did you say something to me? It's like he didn't even know that I had spoken to him. And it was like he sort of would snap out of it and like, did Mom say something to me? He was in a different world. And I didn't know what it was, but what we did start to encounter is by September of 2008, this is when Mark experienced we experienced a first full-blown psychotic episode out of our son, Mark. We were awakened in the middle of the night to him yelling and screaming, get off me, get off me, get his goons off me, they're hurting me. Dad, help me, help me. Dave went downstairs where Mark was sleeping, and Mark was crouched down by his bed, begging for help, terrified because he was being attacked. Dave managed to get Mark up the steps, and you're going to see throughout my talking, and you probably already have, how naive we were with someone who has an illness in their brain. And we attempted to reason with our son and to talk logically to him that, no, nobody's attacking you, Mark. No, nobody's here trying to hurt you. No, you're not our coon dog, Chief. No, you don't have feathers on your arms. All of these things that he just was yelling and screaming, all these different things going on. And it was the most bizarre experience and frightening, terrifying experience that we did not realize was only the first of many. This went on for hours, and finally Mark had turned on us and he said, fine, Dave and Joan, if you won't believe me, I'm better off dead. And he stormed out of the house. We never expected to see our son alive after that moment. We were absolutely devastated, terrified, lost, alone, had no idea what to do. We prayed about it, we talked about it. I had worked at the auditor's office in our county for 8 years, and I said to Dave, well, I know the sheriff's department can help us, because I remember having to pay claims for transportation, and I go, I don't know, we had tried to get him to get in the car to take him to the hospital, and he refused, and he's very strong, and we weren't wanting to drag him with force to the car, but he kept refusing, and I said, well, if he comes back, if he starts in again, I think we need to call the sheriff for help. Well, Mark did come back, and we did end up calling the sheriff for help. And Mark saw him drive in, and he walked out and met the sheriff out on the driveway. And he was talking really loud to the sheriff and yelling and saying things about us, that we were trying to attack him, trying to abuse him, and all this and that. The sheriff came in, and he stated to us, he said, I've seen it before, and he said, I'd hate to tell you this, Joan and Dave, but we need to get him into a mental health unit and get him evaluated. And he goes, he's having a psychotic breakdown. This is not the first, and this will not be the last time you experience this. It's hard as parents to face the idea that something might be wrong in this bright, intelligent mind of your son. It's really hard. I had a big stigma about that because back then I thought you just choose. You can make a choice to be better. You can control this. I was as ignorant as the rest of them. I've learned a lot over the last 10 years, a lot. But long and short of it, I didn't want to face the idea that my son might have something wrong in his head because this mama couldn't kiss it and make it better. Couldn't do it. We agreed to commit our son, and it was horrible. We had no idea what a committal meant. You know, I went to the doctor a couple years ago, and I got a phone call at night from my doctor personally stating that I needed to get back in the next day. She goes, we don't like some of your lab test results, and it's type 2 diabetes, and your numbers are way off the chart. Went back the next day, the doctor explained what was going on with my blood work. The doctor, I had to sit down and get educated on how to eat and how to exercise, which I don't do very well, and how I should test my glucose every day. So I received a treatment plan. I understood I have to take medication every day. They said you're going to be back here in 2 weeks, and then it'll be a month, then it'll be a quarter. Now I'm down to 6 months that I go back. But they explained everything. I got my diagnosis and everything. So when my son went for this committal, a 7-day committal at a mental health unit at a hospital, I was very sure that he was going to get to spend hours with a psychiatrist, and they're going to give him a diagnosis, and they're going to give him medication, and he's going to come home, and everything's going to be happy-go-lucky. You all can laugh at me. It's okay. That's very ignorant on my part. That's not how it works. Brain illnesses can take years to diagnose, especially if you have co-occurring symptoms, if you have substance abuse going on, or maybe even the history of substance abuse. It can jade a doctor's diagnosis initially in the mental health unit and maybe not digging real deep. All I know is when my son left that committal, the county attorney asked us if we would be willing to take him home, of course. And I said, but here's the deal. We need to know what's his treatment plan, if he's supposed to, he said, well, he's supposed to get counseling. Well, where is he going to counseling, and how will he get there, and how will we make sure he's getting there? And he's supposed to take medication. Well, what medication? And well, that's Mark. Mark has to take care of that. Well, who's going to help him be accountable? Because what we've lived through these last few weeks, we don't think that our he's going to need someone to support him in this and help him with this. Well, you're going to have to talk to Mark, but nothing for us to understand what was going on, just will you take him home? Well, we did take him home, and he was extremely angry with us, and of course he lost his job because he refused to tell them why he was in the hospital for a week, which he wouldn't have lost his job had he told them. But here's this whole piece. Nobody wants to talk about an illness that's here. Nobody wants to share with other family members about a loved one that has an illness here. We have to start breaking that open, folks. We have to start talking about this. We have to start helping individuals realize it's okay to tell your employer that you were in the hospital for an illness in your brain. That's okay to do. They don't have to know anything more than that. They don't even have to know that. They just need to know, I was in the hospital for a week. Here's a note stating I was in the hospital. That's all they need to know. But they have to be supported and understand. So let's talk about this next segment of what comes into play with someone who is trying to navigate through this maze of our mental health system. And it used to be called the local CPC Center Point Coordinator. Now we're in mental health regions. But at this time, that was the role that Mark was involved with because he had met up with the CPC And he was placed in a treatment for counseling and things like this. But what took place over the next few months here is Mark ended up having 8 more severe psychotic episodes, such as the one in September that we experienced. And that resulted in 19 days at the hospital in the mental health unit. We also needed to call the sheriff each of those 8 times because he was too much for us to handle. One particular night, Mark had dialed 911 and was yelling at us and yelling to the 911 that his parents were trying to abuse him, that we were in a conspiracy to hurt him, and that he needed help. We didn't think he had dialed it because we just thought he was just in the middle of this episode again. Unbeknownst to us, he did, and when he hung up the phone, they called me back on my cell phone and said, 3 deputies are on the way, Joan. We're sending help. They were so familiar with our son's experiences and his episodes by now. And it was on Saturday night at 12:30, and that deputy called the sheriff or the CPC at home and said, here's what's going on. And he said, what do you want us to do? And so they talked, and then he put me on the phone. And I'll never forget the words that I said to that gentleman. I said, nothing's happening. Nothing's getting better. I don't know if Mark is making it to his appointments. I don't see him taking medication. Nothing's getting better. What is it going to take to get our son the help he so desperately needs? Well, he listened. By Monday, he had called me and said that he had changed Mark's order to a different agency. That agency called, 2 people called, and they contacted Mark, and within a week, they had Mark out of our home into his own living situation, which gave him such a sense of hope because he finally felt like he could be independent. He wanted to be an adult. He wanted to be a functional member of society, and he was battling this illness that he didn't know what it was. And he was trying so hard to be normal. And he was so sad because why can't I be normal? Well, he got a job, and things were really looking up for him. He got a job, he was living on his own, and he was opening up to this agency and giving them details of the horror and terror that he was living day in and day out. He shared with them the voices. He shared with them the out-of-body experiences he was having. He started communicating with Dave and I about all of this. So we could tell that things were happening. In fact, we had tried really hard to call different times to get information. I want to see something here. I just wanted to tell you that when we would see little slips laying around, we were calling to all these agencies to report specific incidences of what Mark and our family was going through. Every time the sheriff had to be called, every time that I might have been threatened in some way, every time that it was just sort of some minor incidences and spells that Dave was able to help calm him down. We were reporting this the best we possibly could because we didn't believe, number one, that Mark was making it to all of his appointments. We didn't believe that those agencies were reporting back that Mark wasn't following that court committal of going to those agencies. And we didn't believe that they understood the seriousness and danger that our son was in. I finally got through to an actual counselor at one point, and she started to say, Joan, I can't talk to you. And I cut her off and I said, you don't have to talk to me, you just have to listen. When I explained again to her all these things, she said, well, I had no idea Mark was going through that. He hasn't shared that with me. And you know, part of the problem is 10 minutes at a typical appointment It takes probably years to build up a trust relationship for an individual to open up and start sharing those kind of details, especially when they don't remember them or they don't believe they're the ones that started it. They believe everybody else is attacking them. Well, this was going pretty well, and excuse me, I'm going to come up to this final piece that comes into play, and it was in play the entire time in our son's life, from the time he was 16 and got involved with the law all the way up to this moment. There's a lot of different incidences that took place. Most of them are very minor, but all of that shows the picture of what this individual is going through. And that's the law enforcement piece of this. Mark had stopped by our house on June 20th, and it was a beautiful summer evening. We had the windows open. It was like 8 o'clock, and he just wanted to stop, and he had taken to doing that and just touching base, hello, I love you, and he had some iced tea with us, and he was on his way. Well, I got to get back, got to work tomorrow. Love you, Mom and Dad, and he took off. A little over an hour later, we get a phone call from our sheriff. Oh, I hated those phone calls. And he said, Joan, I just want you to know Mark is okay. I said, I know Mark's okay. He was just here over an hour ago. He said, that's impossible. What had proceeded to take place when Mark left our home is he had driven 20 miles to the edge of Cedar Falls to a gentleman's home who was actually the father of one of Mark's classmates when Mark went to high school with this kid in Parkersburg. He had gone to this gentleman's house and started banging on the doors and the garage doors, demanding the man come out because he needed to talk some sense into him. Well, the man did the right thing and called 911 because he wasn't going to come out with a guy with a baseball bat. Mark heard the sirens and took off on a high-speed chase through gravel roads through the town of Parkersburg, back north out where we live, and hit a deer and was forced off the road. Our sheriff arrived on the scene to see Mark face down and several different law enforcement agencies, guns drawn. The sheriff said, stand down, this man has mental illness. We have got to get him into the mental health, the hospital. What had occurred is Mark believed that this gentleman had placed a spell on a teddy bear and was controlling Mark's actions through that teddy bear. That was Mark's thought process when he went to see that gentleman that night. Obviously very bizarre, obviously very, very sick young man. Sunday morning, the sheriff called us at 6 in the morning, and he just said, Joan, I want you to know we're getting Mark transferred now. There were no beds available at the hospital where he's been formally committed, and we have to take him to a different hospital. Again, my naivety comes out when I believed that the sheriff would be explaining about Mark's mental health history and that Mark's mental health records would follow him to that mental health unit. That's what I thought. I talked to Mark's counselor on Monday morning, or caseworker, whatever you call him, and I said, can Dave and I go see Mark? We had always visited our son every single day that he was in the hospital. And I tell you what, you get so incredibly weary and tired, and you don't even know how to think straight anymore. And I just said to him, I said, should Dave and I go visit Mark or not? What do you want us? Just tell us what to do. We don't know what to do anymore. He went and met with Mark, and he met with Mark's psychiatrist, and they had gotten him on some medication, and they agreed that we should not visit Mark. And the caseworker said, let us get him stable, let's get him out of the hospital. I'll let you know when you and Dave can go see Mark again. And I asked him, I said, well, what about the medications from his appointment in April with the psychiatrist? Because we had called to report an incident to the agency, and they had said, by the way, our team believes your son has paranoid schizophrenia. We're getting him an appointment with a psychiatrist so we can get him on medication. So all these months, Mark is just wandering and lost in this illness, and we were finally starting to get a step closer. Good, he's going to get on medication. Let's get going. Well, I asked, now, is this medication in the hospital going to conflict or be in the way of this medication that he got in April? Joan, he hasn't seen that psychiatrist yet. That's scheduled for July 23rd. So they called in April, and even though we had called to report dangerous situations to the point that I couldn't even be in my own home anymore when Mark went into a psychotic episode because it was not safe for me to do so, but yet it didn't warrant enough emphasis to get our son into the psychiatrist earlier. Well, at any rate, and the sheriff had told us that it was going to be at least Friday before Mark would be released. So we knew, okay, we're not going to go see him. We know Mark is safe. We know everybody else is safe. Let's just have a few days here that we just let the doctors work and the medication work. So Tuesday night at 9 o'clock, why did we get a phone call from our son Mark stating he was at the Burger King on University in Waterloo? Not a good place to be. I said, you're out of the hospital? And he said, yeah. I didn't even ask him how or why or what. I just said, stay right there. Somebody's going to come and get you. Because he was locked out of his apartment, so he asked if he could come and spend the night at our house. I called, I just said, stay put. So I called the agency where Mark was going to and getting services and reached their answering service, and I explained that our son had been let out of the hospital and we needed to talk to his counselor. And she said, you'll have to call back after 8:15 tomorrow morning. So Dave and I got in the car to start the 40-minute drive. I called the agency back again, and I said, okay, I need to explain to you. We were told not to have contact with our son. We were told he was going to be in the hospital mental health unit at least until Friday. He's on the street in Waterloo, and we don't know how he got out of the hospital or why he's locked out of his apartment. You'll have to call back after 8:15 tomorrow morning. So we proceeded to pick up our son. He was extremely tired. We took him home, and he just wanted to go to sleep. And so he went to bed, and Dave and I slept with the door locked and one eye open. We didn't really sleep. We talked all night and prayed all night. But we did make a plan for the next day. I knew I couldn't stay in the house by myself with my son, Mark. That had long ago been taken out of the mix. I couldn't be there. So I was going to go to the Ames office and work there. That's an hour and a half from our home. And Dave is a mechanic 6 miles away at our county. He was going to go get his mechanic started on work. He was going to call the sheriff and let him know that Mark was at our place and that he was out of the hospital. And so I left, and Dave went to work, and he called the sheriff at 7 o'clock. He wasn't in yet, left a message for him to call. And I was out on the phone in Ames with a client, and I was on the phone, and my cell phone just started going crazy with missed phone calls and text messages. And you all know you never like to see that happen because you know something's wrong. In the meantime, Dave's at work, and the shop, the people were just starting to do this, starting to talk and sort of chatter. And Dave goes, what's going on? And they said, Coach Thomas has been shot in the weight room. Dave's immediate response was, no, I don't think so. No, there's an ambulance there. Coach Thomas is hurt. And Dave goes, I'll bet he had a heart attack. Because you see, we knew from our Sunday school class meeting every day that Ed had a serious heart condition. He talked about it and asked for prayer about it. So that was Dave's immediate response. Same thing happened to me when I got off the phone at the office, and one of my co-workers comes running to me saying, Coach Thomas has been shot. I responded immediately the same way my husband had. There was no way he would have been shot. We live in a little town of 2,000 people. Those things don't happen there. My neighbor called Dave about then, And Dave goes, JJ, have you heard anything about Coach Thomas being shot? And JJ said, neighbor, you need to come home. Coach Thomas has been shot, and you have law enforcement all over your yard, and it appears that Mark is involved. Dave and I communicated shortly after that moment, and I asked Dave about Coach Thomas, and his silence on the other end of the line made me start to be fearful of what was going to be said. And he repeated what our neighbor had told him and said, you need to have your brother give you a ride home. You need to come to the sheriff's department. They want to talk to us. So right after I talked to Dave, I got a phone call from Mark's counselor, and he says, Joan, how you doing? I said, how do you think I'm doing? I tried to call you last night, and they wouldn't let me talk to you. He says, I know, we're reviewing that right now. Now I know, folks, missing that phone call probably wouldn't have changed these events whatsoever. But I will tell you, that was like having the final door slammed in our face in our efforts to try and get someone to listen about how serious our son's situation was and to try and get help with it. So you see, you have a patient, an individual that comes in and needs help. They are made up of so many parts, and so many pieces are a part of their story. But if we don't start approaching this whole treatment system with a holistic method that you bring together family and law enforcement and medical history and educational history and social history, you need to get the answers of who makes up that person, because those people have a name. This person was Mark Becker. All those pieces, that new parts, that new pieces, but nobody could put it all together to help our son. I want to state, before I even go on and tell you about Mark and how he's doing today, I know we have fantastic people working in our mental health system. And I also know the system's broke. They're doing the best they can in an absolute fragmented system. So if any of you are out there and you work in the system, please know we harbor no judgment towards individuals that were a part of my son's case, because we know they were trying to do the best that they could. We believe that, and we're going to continue to believe that. So where is Mark today? He received a life without parole prison sentence. We really didn't expect a jury to understand what insanity is when they hear from every expert witness that says exactly what the prosecution or defense wants them to say. They're not educated in what, mental illness is or insanity, and we really didn't expect anything different than that result. Mark is at the Iowa Department of Corrections in Coralville, Iowa. He's in the mental health unit, and he gets very good care. He signed a release of information for me and Dave to be a part of his life and a part of his treatment system. At any minute, I can have a whole conference room of people at the other end to talk to about how my son's doing and things I'm observing in my son and bring it to their attention. I've only had to do that 2 times. But I swore to my son I would be his advocate till the day I die. And his 2 brothers will be his advocate till the day they die. But the beauty of it is Mark has progressed so much in his illness. He went to jail, and he was diagnosed at Cerro Gordo County Jail with paranoid schizophrenia and started receiving medication for that illness. It took about 6 to 9 months for Mark to know us as mom and dad again, and to not have the thousands of voices terrorizing him on a daily basis. Once he went to Coralville, I was scared to death that that treatment would not continue, but it did continue. He has a psychiatrist, he has a psychologist, and he has a group of people that work with him and stay on top of him and help monitor his illness. But here's the beauty. Mark has come along so far, and this has only happened in the last year, because it's been a roller coaster, folks, as with any mental illness is. But he actually recognizes now when he can't sleep at night, when he's being attacked again, when he's hearing the voices again, and he goes to his doctor and says, it's not working. He is taking ownership of his illness. That is huge. That gives me such a sense of peace to know he's been learning all about it. Since he's been diagnosed and has received medication, let me see, I'm doing okay. He has been able to do his art again. He plays guitar. He reads all levels of, he's read the Bible, textbooks, all kinds of philosophy books. He's actually reading a book right now about the brain. He's been trying to study the brain and learn more about, he's an extremely intelligent young man, but he made this note that I want to make sure I share. I'll get back to this piece, yeah. He says, I'm making headway on a historical topic. It was man's curiosity about the source of spirit leading to anatomy, neurology, brain study, and medicine. Also my keen interest being madness and other mental aberrations of man, and to understand the exact point of its birth or manifesting. Because of this book, I've realized the age-old struggle of our need for more understanding in the field. Many point to spiritual source, and just as many point to material source. This was used in combination for centuries. And look at us now. Nothing has changed. For him to have that insight, I couldn't have said it any better. Any better. So we get back to the point is, how can I make a difference? And I think even more importantly, how can every one of us make a difference? Each of you play a key part in helping make positive changes to a system that doesn't work right now. And you might sit back and say, well, what can I do? Well, it wasn't easy for me to get up and share a personal story such as this, but when I hear the feedback from families, from caregivers, from mental health providers, from psychiatrists, from nurses, from law enforcement, stating, hearing a personal story helps understand more when that family walks in the door, I think of, okay, they've been through everything before they walk through our doors. We need to listen and hear what they have to say. Don't let HIPAA stop you. HIPAA doesn't mean that you can't listen, okay? You can even ask questions. You just can't share what you are talking with that individual. But please let the family know there's a form that that individual can sign so that they can talk to you about it. Because guess what? When they come home from being committed, they're not about to tell you that there's a form that they could sign so we can be more a part of their life. But we could pick the time that they are stable, that they are vulnerable in a sense to be open to your support and to your love and being part of that system. Please tell people about places like NAMI, that families can get education and understand more about these illnesses. Yes, it's not your job as a mental health provider to do that for the families, but please let them know there are agencies out there that can. We heard about NAMI the first day of our son's trial, when someone walked up and gave my twin sister a card saying, NAMI might be able to help your sister and her husband just understand more about what their son went through. You know, we had no idea it existed. So please share that information with others. There's a lot of smart people in this room. And I bet if each one of you really got to thinking about it and really started looking at it closely, you could find a way to provide innovative ideas to help make changes in our system. Whether it's talking to your legislators, talking to your law enforcement, saying get with the Stepping Up program instead of putting these people in jail, get them to a mental health unit. Start getting involved, start educating yourself. The little things can make a big difference. Two bills were passed this year and actually signed by Governor Branstad, and I've got a link to these on my website. One of them is going to open up the door a little bit with this HIPAA stuff. If you take in your loved one and they are not in the frame of mind to be making a decision for themselves, they are going to allow families to help make decisions for their loved one. That in a nutshell is what that's about. Another one, and then I'll open it up for questions, is, and I could never understand this. There was one point in my son's life that he was on probation. And so he was court ordered to show up for his probation appointments. And if he didn't show up, they would have kindly picked him up, and the sheriff's department would have picked him up and taken him back to jail. Why is a court committal any different? Was anyone reporting to the county that Mark wasn't showing up for his court-ordered appointments? No. Well, there's a bill now that's going to allow those agencies not only to do that, but they need to do that, and that person's going to get picked up and taken to the agency. They're going to meet with their counselor. They're going to probably give them a shot because they realize, okay, they didn't show up for their appointment. We need to get their medication back up to play. Instead of waiting 6 or 12 months with a person getting lost in the system again and you start all over again, they can stay on top of this so that there isn't so much interruption to care. That is a huge, huge step. Huge step. One final step, and I haven't checked yet if Governor has signed it yet, but that is the bill that will allow psychologists with some additional training to be able to prescribe medications. Big one. So, in summary, I believe that sharing our story can and is making a difference, and I believe that every one of you can help make a difference. And that is why I came today. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Joan, very, very much for sharing your story with us tonight. We would like to open it to the audience for questions. We have a microphone in the back and one in the front. If you have a question for Joan, if you could raise your hand, and we can bring the microphone to you. So questions?
It's okay, I answer any questions. Do I get to see Mark on a regular basis? We can go visit him on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we can spend up to 4 hours with him, and then all holidays. But we usually go like about every 6 weeks and spend a couple hours. But in Iowa, we are blessed to have an email system. So I stay caught up with him on a daily basis through the email. So we're very fortunate for that. But you know, it's sort of like his life doesn't change a lot, but we keep up through email, but we go and we can have that face-to-face time, and nothing's better than a hug and seeing that beautiful smile. Thank you. Yes?
Joan, would you share about the Thomas family and how they responded nationally on the news?
Absolutely. So as far as how the Thomas family responded, you know, a lot of places I go, people say to me, you know, we hear how great your community is and how great they're treating you guys. Is that really happening? You know, they want to know, is that real? You bet it's real. You bet it's real. And you know why it happened? I believe firmly that the very night of this incident, when Aaron Thomas was giving his press release, and he asked for everyone to remember the Becker family in their prayers. That just opened up almost like a permission, if you will, to let and allow our community know how to respond. How would you respond? Here you've got two families in your church, active in the community, and this happens. It's like, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to respond? But the Thomases opened that up, and I tell you, they have been phenomenal with us. I talked to Jan that very night, and she and I talked, and she reassured me she was separating what Mark had done from the rest of the family, and she wanted us to know that. And you know, when you walk downtown in our community today and the storekeepers are asking, how's Mark doing? You know that healing is taking place, but I don't know what we would have done had our community not embraced us that way. Thank you for asking.
When your son was in the hospital the last time, was he committed? And how did he get out? Did you ever find that out?
We found out during the trial. Yes, he was committed. We found out during the trial that Mark told the nurse he was feeling fine, and the nurse called the psychiatrist at home, and they released him. It was his counselor from the agency that picked him up and took him to his apartment, and did get him into his apartment. But when Mark showered and he left to walk to Burger King because he had no food in his apartment, and he locked himself out. So I understand. Now, this isn't anything I found out firsthand, but I was speaking at a college class at UNI, and the professor explained to me, she said, did you realize the psychiatrist isn't practicing at Covenant anymore? And I said, no, I did not. And she said, in fact, she's not practicing at all anymore. This experience devastated her. And she recognized that it just was something, and I can't imagine trying to be in people's shoes that try and work with these individuals. This is a difficult thing that you have to do if you're working in this field. But that's how he got out, and we don't know why he wasn't released to the sheriff's department. Apparently that paperwork never got filed either. So it was just, he didn't fall through cracks, folks. He fell in a ravine in this whole thing. Anyone else? Yes.
You perhaps have already answered. You perhaps have already answered this question. What two facts do you believe keep your son moving in a positive way at this point?
Two facts keeping my son moving in a positive way. Number one, he finally has accepted and understands, yes, he has an illness in his brain, and it contributed to his actions that day. As horrific, I mean, he still struggles with this. But number two, he says, I'm the richest man here. He goes, not because you send me a stipend each month so that I can get good shampoo and books to read. It's because of my family upbringing and your never-ending support and love that you have shown me. So it keeps me going.
Did he know at the time that he had done this, or did he realize it, or did that come afterwards?
I'll never forget going to see him at the Saragordo County Jail. We went up every week on Wednesday night to visit him. And we sat down, and I could tell he was really worked up about something. And he said, and he even started crying. He goes, I feel I've got needles pointing out from the inside, nails pointing out of my stomach. I hurt so bad. I go, Mark, what's going on? He said, my attorney is making me read the transcript of after I was arrested. He goes, I didn't remember I had done any of this stuff. He goes, how could have I done this? How could I not remember this? So he did not remember it until he read through the transcript again. He did not know.
Are there any additional questions?
One more?
Since your son is stable now with the medication, is there any hope that he could get another trial and have a chance to live a more normal life outside of the prison?
There's only one avenue remaining that could, it's very rare that it would happen, but it's called the post-conviction relief process. That still remains, that's a hearing for anyone that has a life sentence, that if an attorney could find some kind of valid reason that Mark's initial trial was aired, it was aired in any way, and a judge thought it warranted a new trial, he could get a new one. But it's extremely rare for that to be successful. We are honestly just praying for God's will in Mark's case, and that God places him where he can get care. I never expected that it would be the prison system.
During all this time that was leading up to what happened, and he was in and out of the hospital, what were some of the diagnoses that they gave you or told him about that he had before he was finally diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoia,
Well,
and
with
cerebrotal?
all those committals, we're not sure if Mark understood. I don't know if a doctor ever told Mark a diagnosis. I don't know that. And we did not get any information because he had not signed a release form to give us that. It wasn't till I started reading through all of the court transcript information and the depositions, is that what they ask people a lot of questions, something like that, that I realized and saw some of those records in the court records, that I see that the very first committal, it was like a multiple diagnosis type thing, like possibilities, and schizophrenia was one of them. In fact, the last committal that he was in, just before this incident happened, it was paranoid schizophrenia was the diagnosis. But we did not know of any formal diagnosis until the jail system told us. Mark has been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and we're getting him on medication. That was the first time we were aware of a diagnosis and a treatment system. Never. And I feel really stupid that I didn't know about that. But why would I know about that? So I talk about it all the time everywhere I go. I want other families to know about it. Yeah, but the county should have been telling us about that form. They should have been telling us. The county attorney should have been telling us. The hospital should have been telling us. We went to see him every single night. They could have told us about that form. Okay.
We have time for, we can just do one or two more questions here. Okay.
In our family situation, this is just a comment. Our oldest daughter suffered with a form of mental illness. And I thought it was so important when our next daughter realized by living with our oldest daughter, she realized what was going on. And she got took steps. And I just thought that was so important. And I'm very proud.
Oh, that's fantastic. I don't know if everybody heard that, but it's fantastic. Good. So there's hope. Never give up hope. Keep trying. I always say, if those doors are closed in your face, pound those doors down. Don't give up. Don't quit asking. Keep trying to get to the bottom of it. Keep trying to get help. Don't give up.
All right, last question. Anyone? All right, well, I think, there is one more. We'll go ahead. Erica will run the mic over to you, and that'll be the last question.
I know here in Dubuque, I think that if you sign someone in to Mercy or Finley, the most they can keep them is like 3 days. Is there any place that will keep someone for, diagnosis for any
Is there anyone
period
here
of
that can
time?
answer that question? I've been telling, I've talked to Governor Branstad, I've talked to Senator Grassley, and I tell them, we have to have the ability, there are certain individuals that need more than that 3 to 5 day committal. I'm talking 6 months till they can realize the effects of that medication. However, the medications are coming a long way. If you could somehow get them a shot that lasts 3 months, oh, that'd be awesome. Or 6 months even. But first they got to be diagnosed so that you can try those. But I don't know the answer. Does anyone here know the answer to that? Don't know the answer to that one. They don't have a place for them. And that's where they're still trying to get these community, in the community, live in the community. But like I told Governor Branstad when he shut the 2 facilities, I said, you want them to have this kind of setting, but you need to have them built and in place before you close the doors of their homes. Just the way it is. Thank you.
If I'm not making a mistake, I've been retired for, I think, 11 years. But before that, I worked for Dubuque County, and the deal was that the county is required to pay for 3 days, or if there's a weekend involved, up to, I think, 7. And I think it's a matter of the hospitals needing reimbursement, and there isn't any.
There isn't any. That's right.
Thank you for that. All right, we are ending the session, but thank you everyone for coming out. Let's give Joan a nice warm round of applause. Thank you very much, Joan. Yep. Thank you everyone. Have a great night, and please share your stories. Thanks.